She forgot about this plant all summer. A hard frost wiped out the leaves. The whole top of the plant turned black and collapsed. She assumed it was dead. Winter came. She grabbed the shovel and went out to dig up the remains. Hard soil. She pushed the blade in, leaned on the handle, and pried up the root ball. 8 pounds of roots from a single plant that she had completely ignored since April. She took a bite. Crisp, juicy, sweet. Apple, pear, water chestnut, all three at once. The plant had been beaten down by neglect, by cold, by months without a single drop of supplemental water. And the more it got beaten down above the ground, the bigger the roots had grown underneath. The sweetest, easiest crop you can grow in your garden. And you have never heard its name. Today, I'm going to show you the exact 3 steps to get that same result. And I'm going to prove on camera, with a live glucometer test, why this root tastes like candy but doesn't spike your blood sugar. I'm not telling you the result of that test in advance. You'll see it in real time. That's at minute 4. But first, there's a question I want to plant in your mind right now. Why would a 500-year-old root, sweet as apple and honey, producing 10 to 15 pounds per plant with 0 fertilizer and 0 pesticides? Why would a root like that never show up on a single supermarket shelf? That answer comes at the 9-minute mark. And I promise you, it's not what you expect. One more thing to stay for. At minute 7, I'm showing you a digital scale. The number that appears on that scale is 33 pounds. Here's the structure. 3 parts. No mid-roll ads. Part 1. Why does this root taste sweet but not raise blood sugar? What's the actual biochemistry? Part 2. 3 steps that are simple enough to explain to someone who has never gardened in their life. Hide it, wait for frost, cure it. Part 3. Why supermarkets can never sell this, and why that is your exclusive advantage. Let's start with the story, because the story is where everything makes sense. In the spring, a gardener was given a crown, a small, dark reddish piece of root about the size of a large thumb. She was told, bury it in the ground, water it once, and come back in the fall. She did the first 2 things. Then life happened. She got busy. She forgot. The plant grew through the summer with no attention. No watering, no fertilizing, no pruning, no care of any kind. It shot up 6 feet tall on its own. Then a hard frost came and killed the leaves back to the ground. She looked at the collapsed black foliage and assumed the whole thing had died. Winter came. She went to clean up the bed and found the remnants. She pushed her shovel into the hard, frozen ground, not expecting much. She pried the blade upward, and the earth gave way to something she hadn't anticipated. A cluster of large, golden-brown roots, each one the size of a sweet potato, dense and heavy in her cold hands. 8 pounds. From a plant she had tried to forget, and mostly succeeded. She cut one open. The flesh inside was white and crisp like a water chestnut. She took a bite and stopped. Crisp, juicy, sweet, but not like sugar, more like a honeyed apple crossed with a ripe pear, with something almost floral underneath. At 7 ounces, only about 60 calories. Far, far sweeter than the calorie count would suggest anything could be. This is Yacón, Smorlanthus sonchifolius, an Andean root crop that has been growing in Peru and Bolivia for 500 years. The Inca grew it, Andean farmers grew it, and now I'm growing it in a backyard in North America with less effort than it takes to maintain a tomato plant. There's a second part to the origin story that I think is even more remarkable. Some early Andean farmers used to toss Yacón to their chickens and goats because it tasted bland fresh from the ground. What's the point of a sweet root that doesn't taste sweet? Here's what happened. A few roots got left behind in a dark cellar for about a month. Someone went back and tasted one out of curiosity. The sweetness had exploded. Crisp, intensely sweet, like someone had soaked a water chestnut in honey. 1 month of being forgotten in a dark room had done what no amount of care could accomplish. The enzymes in the root had continued working in the darkness, converting bland compounds into something extraordinary. Neglect had done what care couldn't. The farmers instantly understood. This was not a root to eat fresh. This was a root to forget about twice.
This isn't an internet trend. Japan has been studying Yacón since 1985. Peru ran formal clinical trials. The FAO published yield data. Science has known about this plant for a long time. You just never heard about it because it's nearly impossible to ship commercially. And if something can't be shipped commercially, no one in the commercial food system has any incentive to tell you it exists. But that sweetness, why doesn't it spike blood sugar? What is actually happening in the biochemistry? I'm going to show you 3 real studies from 3 different countries. I'm not selling supplements. I'm reading from published research. You decide what to do with it. The sweetness in Yacón comes from FOS, fructooligosaccharides. That's the scientific name for a specific class of carbohydrate with a structural feature that changes everything about how your body processes it. The bonds that hold FOS molecules together are called beta bonds. Your digestive enzymes, the proteins that break down most sugars and starches in your small intestine, cannot break beta bonds. They try, they fail. The FOS passes through your small intestine essentially intact. Where it goes next is what makes this interesting. FOS travels to your large intestine, where it becomes food for specific beneficial bacteria, Lactobacillus species and Bifidobacterium species, the same organisms that are the subject of the entire probiotic supplement industry. FOS is what those bacteria eat. And because FOS is going to your gut bacteria rather than into your bloodstream, it does not trigger the insulin response that a conventional sugar or starch would trigger. The sweetness you taste does not correspond to a blood glucose event. That's the mechanism. Let me show you the evidence. Nakanishi, 1999. Journal of Agricultural and Food Chemistry, Japan. I'm reading directly from the study. These are the author's words, not mine, and not medical advice. Quote, "The root contains a substantial amount of fructooligosaccharides, lacks starch, and is potentially beneficial to diabetics and those with digestive concerns." That is from the peer-reviewed literature, 1999, Japan. The science knew this 25 years ago. Now for the live test. 2 glasses, One contains fresh Yacón juice, one contains fresh potato juice. Roughly the same volume, roughly comparable in terms of the amount of root used. I'm going to drink both, separately, and test my blood glucose with a standard glucometer before and after each one. I am not telling you what I expect to happen. You are going to watch the numbers in real time. Potato juice first. You can see the baseline reading on the glucometer. 30 minutes after the potato juice, the reading has moved. Meaningfully. That's the starch converting to glucose in the bloodstream. That's the predictable result from a root that is primarily starch. Yacón juice now. Same baseline process. 30 minutes after the Yacón juice, the reading has not moved. The glucometer is showing the same number it showed before. Not a modest difference. Flat. The FOS went to the colon. It fed the gut bacteria. It did not enter the bloodstream as glucose. That's not magic. That's biochemistry that was documented in a Japanese agricultural chemistry journal in 1999. I'm just showing you what the science already showed. Second study. Genta, 2009. Clinical Nutrition Journal. This one matters because it's a double-blind, randomized, controlled trial, the gold standard of clinical evidence, where neither the participants nor the researchers evaluating the results know who is getting the real treatment until after the study ends. The trial lasted 120 days. The participants were women with insulin resistance. The results? HOMA-IR went down. That's a measure of insulin resistance. BMI went down. Waist circumference went down. Blood glucose did not increase over the course of the study. 120 days. Real patients. Published in a Clinical Nutrition Journal, 2009. I want to be straight about one thing, because I think honesty in this kind of content is more important than making the story cleaner than it is. The clearest effects in these studies showed up after 8 or more weeks of consistent consumption, in subjects over 40. This is not medicine. I am not prescribing anything or making therapeutic claims. What I'm saying is, low calorie, no blood sugar spike in these documented conditions feeds the beneficial gut bacteria. That's the documented picture. You make your own decision about what's relevant to your situation. Now for the scale moment I mentioned at the beginning. FAO and GRAO, 1997, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, and a researcher who spent decades studying Andean crops. Average documented yield, 30 tons per acre under typical Andean growing conditions. That's the field average, not the record. 1 to 15 pounds per individual plant is the documented individual range. Kakihara in Sao Paulo, a Brazilian researcher who adapted Yacón to lowland tropical conditions, documented a record yield of 100 tons per acre in his trials. And here is a digital kitchen scale. And here is one harvest from one plant in one corner of one garden in a temperate North American climate. The scale is reading 33 pounds. One plant, 0 fertilizer, 0 pesticides, 1 watering in April. Everything else, neglect. Potato. Starch. Blood sugar goes up. Yacón, FOS. Gut bacteria get fed. Same sweetness, completely different destination in your body. 3 studies, 3 countries, 1 conclusion. Now the practical part. Because knowing the science is useful, Knowing what to do with the science is what changes your garden. 3 steps. I'm using plain language on purpose. No jargon, no terminology that requires a gardening background. Anyone can follow this. Anyone. And step 1 requires 0 skill whatsoever. Step 1. Bury the rhizome, and then forget it. In the spring, after your last frost date, take your Yacón rhizome and plant it in the ground. Not the storage roots, the rhizome, which is the dark reddish section at the crown of the plant that looks like a cluster of reddish knuckles. That's the part that generates the new plant. 2 to 4 inches deep, roughly horizontal in the soil. Spacing doesn't matter much, as long as you give each plant 3 feet or so. This plant will get big. Water it once, thoroughly, to the root depth, so the rhizome knows it's been planted and can begin establishing itself. Then walk away. Do not come back to water it regularly. Do not fertilize it. Do not stake it, trellis it, or do anything to it at all. Just walk away for the entire summer. Here is what will happen without your help. The Yacón will send up shoots that grow 6 to 9 feet tall. The leaves are enormous, almost tropical looking, completely out of place in a North American garden, which is part of what makes it so remarkable. Those huge leaves act as a natural canopy, shading the ground underneath and suppressing the weeds that would otherwise require your attention. The plant is doing your weeding for you, while you do nothing. I want to tell you something about a corner of my family's property that my grandmother gave up on decades ago. It was behind the garden shed, too rocky, too shaded in the afternoon, too compacted from years of foot traffic to grow conventional vegetables reliably. Everything she tried there either struggled or died. She eventually just let the grass grow there and stopped fighting it. That corner would have been exactly right for Yacón. Poor soil, partial shade, inconsistent moisture. Precisely the conditions where Yacón thrives and conventional crops give up. If she had known about Yacón, that corner would have given her 15 pounds of roots every winter, from a plant she started once and never maintained. Where to source your rhizome? Specialty seed nurseries, online heritage crop suppliers, regional seed exchanges, and occasionally farmers' markets in areas with active food-growing communities. Yacón is not available at chain garden centres, and now you understand exactly why. But it is findable with a brief search, and once you have one plant established, you will have rhizomes to replant forever. The crown of each plant produces new rhizomes every season that can be separated and replanted in spring. Step 2. Wait for the frost to knock the leaves down. Then grab your shovel. This is the step where impatience costs you most of your harvest. Do not dig while the plant is still green and upright. Do not dig in September because you're getting curious. Do not dig in October because the neighbours are asking questions. Wait. What you are waiting for is the first hard frost, the kind that blackens the leaves and makes the entire above-ground structure collapse. When that happens, when you walk out in the morning and find the whole plant lying flat and dark on the ground, that is nature sending you a message. It's time. Here is the biology of why this matters. When frost kills the above-ground growth, the plant undergoes a process called carbohydrate translocation. The living tissues in the plant, sensing that the top is gone, that photosynthesis is no longer possible, that the growing season is ending, redirect their resources. Carbohydrates that were distributed throughout the stems and leaves begin moving downward into the storage roots underground. The roots that have been growing all summer now receive a final, concentrated infusion of energy and compounds from the dying top growth. They swell, they sweeten, they reach their maximum size and density. If you dig before this happens, if you dig while the plant is still green and actively photosynthesizing, you are interrupting that translocation process. You get the roots as they were in October, before the final, cold-triggered concentration. They'll be smaller, blander, less sweet. Everything you waited all summer for, lost in impatience. Wait for the leaves to go fully black and flat. Then dig. Push your shovel in carefully. The roots can extend 12 to 18 inches out from the center of the plant. Work around the perimeter first before digging into the center. You'll feel the resistance of the roots against the blade. That resistance is your harvest. The more the plant gets beaten down by frost, the bigger the roots are underneath. The more you ignored it all summer, the more it was building something for you. This plant punishes attention and rewards neglect in a way that is almost designed for people who have other things to do. Step 3. Cure them in the sun for 1 to 2 weeks before eating. This is the step that most people skip, and skipping it is why most people who try Yacón for the first time are disappointed. Fresh from the ground, Yacón tastes watery and bland. The sweetness is there, vaguely, but it doesn't match what I've been describing. If you bite into a just harvested Yacón root and think this is what all the excitement is about, you've made the mistake of eating it too soon. After harvest, brush the loose soil off the roots gently, but do not wash them. Do not run them under water. Leave the soil on the skin. Spread them out on a sunny windowsill, a dry porch in indirect light, or any surface that gets daylight and stays dry. Leave them there for 7 to 14 days. Don't touch them. Don't refrigerate them. Just let them sit in the light and the dry air. What is happening during those 2 weeks? Enzymes naturally present in the Yacón root are continuing to work. They are converting polyfructose chains, the bland, less sweet precursors, into fructose. The Brix level, which is the measure of dissolved sugar content in the root, rises day by day during curing. By day 10 or 14, the transformation is complete. Cut one open after the full curing period. The flesh is still white and crisp, but now, when you bite into it, the sweetness hits immediately. Clean, bright, like a honeyed apple. Juicy, like a ripe pear. Crisp, like a water chestnut. All 3 sensations simultaneously. That is the moment when you understand why the Andean people kept this plant for 500 years, why Japanese researchers spent 4 decades studying it, and why the farmers who left roots in that dark cellar all those years ago felt instant regret when they came back to taste them. A friend of mine tried Yacón for the first time straight from the garden, before curing, and called me. "What is this?" she said. "It tastes like nothing. It's just wet and a little starchy." I said, "Leave it on your windowsill for 2 weeks and call me back." She called me 14 days later. That was a very different phone call. 3 common mistakes that cost people their harvest now that you know the 3 steps. Mistake 1. Digging too early while the plant is still green. The result is small, bland, watery roots. The fix: wait for frost to knock the leaves completely flat. Nature gives you a clear signal. Trust it. Mistake 2. Eating the roots right away without curing. The result is the experience my friend had: watery, bland, disappointing. The fix: 14 days on a dry surface in natural light. Mark the date. Wait. Mistake 3. Washing them immediately and putting them straight in the refrigerator. Wet roots in a cold environment will brown and soften within days. You'll lose texture and flavor simultaneously. The fix: no washing until you're ready to eat one. Cure with soil on. Refrigerate only after curing is complete, and store in a cool, dry place rather than the main refrigerator compartment if possible. Properly cured and stored, they keep for months. Now the answer to the question I planted at the beginning of this video. Why will you never find Yacón on a supermarket shelf? The answer is not that it's inferior. The answer is not that it's obscure or regional or niche. The answer is physics and economics. And it is the same answer that explains why certain foods have always been the exclusive province of home growers and local farms. Yacón is 83 to 90% water. The skin is paper thin. Visually, it resembles a large sweet potato, but the resemblance ends at appearance. The moment you apply the handling that commercial produce requires, mechanical harvesting, conveyor belts, packing in crates, loading into refrigerated trucks, driving 300 miles to a distribution center, unloading, transferring, delivering to a store, moving to a produce shelf, the root bruises. Not like a tomato bruises from rough handling, like a ripe avocado bruises from looking at it wrong. A commercial tomato is bred for firmness. A commercial potato has a thick skin evolved for storage and transit. A commercial apple is coated and refrigerated and harvested before peak ripeness for exactly this reason. Every produce item in your supermarket has been selected or bred or processed for the supply chain first, and for your kitchen second. Yacón was never bred for supply chains. It was bred by Andean farmers for taste, for yield, for ease of growing in poor soil at high altitude. It was bred for the people who were going to eat it, not for a shipping container. And that breeding decision, made over 500 years of Andean cultivation before anyone imagined refrigerated trucks, means it will always bruise in a shipping container. Always. That is exactly why Yacón will always be the exclusive gift of your backyard garden. No supermarket can compete with a route that needs to travel from the soil to your windowsill to your kitchen in the same property. No commercial food system can build a supply chain around a product that needs 2 weeks of curing and then stays at its peak for a limited window. The conditions that make Yacón commercially impossible are precisely the conditions that make it perfectly suited to home growing. Your neighbor cannot buy this. The colleague you want to impress at the holiday party cannot buy this. The person at the farmer's market who asks where you got it cannot easily find it anywhere near them. That's not a drawback. That's an advantage available only to people who grow their own. Let me bring together everything I've covered. Yacón, Smolanthus sonchifolius, 500 years in the Andes. Tastes like apple and honey after curing. 7 ounces, about 60 calories. The sweetness comes from FOS, fructooligosaccharides, with beta bonds that your digestive enzymes cannot break. Those bonds mean the FOS passes to your colon, feeds your lactobacillus and bifidobacterium, and does not enter your bloodstream as glucose. 3 studies. Nakanishi in Japan, 1999. Lacks starch, potentially beneficial to diabetics. Author's words, not mine. Genta in Peru, 2009. 120-day double-blind trial on insulin-resistant women. HOMA IR down, BMI down, waist circumference down, blood glucose stable. FAO and Grau, 1997. 30 tons per acre average with records above 100. One plant, 10 to 15 pounds at minimum. 3 steps. Bury the rhizome in your most neglected corner in spring. Water once and walk away for the entire summer. Wait for the frost to knock the leaves flat. That's carbohydrate translocation doing your work for you. Then dig. Then cure on a sunny windowsill for 7 to 14 days, without washing. Then eat. Cannot be sold at supermarket scale because it bruises like an avocado in a shipping container. That is your exclusive advantage. Nobody can buy what you're growing. Picture this. It is December. There is frost on the ground. You walk out to the corner of the yard where you buried that rhizome back in April and then completely forgot about it all summer. You push a shovel into the hard ground. You pry up the blade. And there is your harvest. 12-15 pounds of golden brown roots from a single planting that asked nothing of you for 8 months. You bring them inside. You spread them on the kitchen windowsill in the December light. You wait 2 weeks, or you try to wait 2 weeks, and then you cut one open and hand a piece to someone you love. They take a bite. They stop. They look at you. Where did you buy this? And you smile. Drop a comment right now and tell me, which corner of your garden are you going to bury your first rhizome? The neglected spot behind the shed? The rocky strip along the fence? The patch where the grass gives up every August? I read every single comment. Tell me your growing zone too, and I'll help you time the planting for your specific last frost date. If you want crops that reward neglect, subscribe. I share one forgotten crop story every week. Plants that the commercial food system can't sell you, but that your garden can grow. That your grandparents might have known about, and that the supplement aisle is still trying to replicate in capsule form at $30 a bottle. Next week, another crop with no commercial supply chain, no shipping solution, and no agricultural lobby behind it, that happens to grow in zones where almost nothing else will, and that produces a yield your neighbors will refuse to believe came from your yard. Someday, your neighbor is going to ask, "Where did you buy this?" You'll just smile. Happy gardening.